Right, hello everybody. Today is Wednesday, April the 3rd. There happens to be a Venus-Neptune conjunction today, but I am making this video about Jupiter and Uranus and Taurus. Even though I already did one, I have more to say. Um, Now, but approaching this topic of the other stuff I have to say about Jupiter Uranus, there's a couple factors going in to influence this. One of them has to do with the fact that one of the, I would say, experiences that have shaped my perspective on life had to do with a Jupiter Uranus conjunction. The last one, they happen approximately every 14 years. And so the last time Jupiter and Uranus was conjunct, it was when I went to Australia. And so there's this association I have with Jupiter and Uranus and this kind of like breaking free and expanding your horizons and all this kind of stuff. However, the thing is, in this current situation, there are a number of factors going on. For one thing, the economic climate, the high prices of fuel. There's a lot of people where I live in Canada protesting the carbon taxes right now. But, aside from that, I have also, I don't know how many of you are new here or are following along with my personal story, but a few years ago, I had a health crisis that landed me in the hospital. And luckily, I was approved for a drug. I'm not going to get into all the details of my what my medical stuff is, but I was I had an inflammation autoimmune crisis, and I was prescribed a drug to help it, and the drug worked remarkably well. And the thing is, but whatever. One of the things about this drug is that I have to go into a clinic and sit with an IV on my arm, and I have to do that once every 2 months. And so I guess if I wanted to travel, I could travel, but I feel it's like this sort of limit that I would have to, I'd have to travel within this 2 month window, right? And then, whereas when I went to Australia when I was younger, I spent a whole year there. And, I've had friends who do these like big backpacking trips where they go to all sorts of different countries. And, it's not restrained into just a little like 2 week vacation or something like that. It's a sort of this grandiose, expansive adventure, which I associate with Jupiter. But there's also, there's certain things too that has to do with tourist culture that I'm not really a fan of. Like, I've found my most is much more enriching to have an experience that isn't just like you sign up for the the guided tour, or you get in line with all the other tourists and stuff like that, right? Now, there's another influence on this that I noticed, and this is another thing. Good or bad, this is, well, it is what it is. This exact conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus happened during World War II, and there's something about it that is kind of like Adolf Hitler on the Blitzkrieg. It's not a very good one, but that is a factor. And part of these, when you put all these different factors together, like people protesting carbon taxes, Adolf Hitler on the Blitzkrieg, me going traveling to Australia, there's a certain thing too about like people. I'm just gonna I made another video, my last Jupiter and Uranus in Taurus video. I was talking about a little bit about how the police were warning that they were thinking there were going to be mass revolts over the next 5 years due to the sort of austerity economics that they were projecting. And one of the things I just had, you can expect people to protest if they're frustrated by the economic conditions. It's maybe that's just something that's bound to happen. But I think it's worth considering that the other countries are feeling the pinch too, and the one thing that came up for me that there's a band from Melbourne called the Drunk Mums who did a music video or a song called The New Australia, which I will put in my notes and references that I do with my videos. And like if you watch this video by the Drunk Mums, and you see what they're saying, that these guys are feeling the pinch of the economic pressure, and there's a certain kind of like, when I was getting my was at the clinic getting my medication, I was overhearing the nurses chat. I'm not trying to eavesdrop, but you can't help but overhear the conversations because you're all in the same room, right? And one of them was talking about how that their social life seems to be dwindling, or this whole thing about like as you're getting older, like you don't go out and party as much anymore, and you've got to live this sort of like kind of mature this is all part of growing up, right? Like you don't go out and party, and you just focus on working your job and stuff like that. But if you look at these guys in Australia, the punk rockers, they're feeling also the sort of like economic pinch, right? Of like if you're out drinking, like how are you going to pay the rent because alcohol is like so expensive, and certain things like this is that maybe it's a good time that I did this when I was younger in my 20s. Although the thing is though is that when I was younger in my 20s, we had the 2008 financial crisis. And, that didn't hold me back at all. And, I went and lived in the city, and I kind of had a crash course in learning how to live in a certain economic climate and a certain economic environment. But of course, this was also like, I kind of felt like I was like the force of gentrification, right? You're like the hip kids who are living in the crappy part of town. But it wasn't cheap though, right? Like you had to like, but you kind of like you found yourself. Oh well, I won't get into all the details of my past, but if you consider all these different influences, there's a book that I found that is called, I'll just show it to you here, Against the Written Word by Ian F. Svenonius. And this is the guy who played in some bands, I don't know if you've heard of them, The Nation of Ulysses, The Weird War, Chain and the Gang, to name a few. And this guy, he was also had a TV show kind of thing with Vice magazine called Soft Focus. I am not going to go into a lot of detail about this Against the Written Word. It seems I'm a big McLuhan guy. It seems like it's a little bit McLuhan influenced. But I would recommend just buy this book and read it, and it's like pretty hilarious. But I'm going to cut to the second chapter and just read it to you. And with all these influences that I've just listed off previously in mind, just listen to what Ian is putting down on the page here. And I'm not, you may agree with it, you may disagree with it. It may be a little bit, maybe it's not your cup of tea, but it's food for thought, up for consideration. It may be going a little bit against the grain of what some of my astrology friends, are like, but I'm just putting it out there for your consideration. All right, here we go. This is called The Grand Tour. The neoliberal army pays its own way. At first glance, tourism is an economic model. A commercial enterprise based on taking a population away from their things, their home, their car, their kitchen, and their community, and placing them as tourists in a foreign environment, where they must forage for food, lodging, transport, and things to do to occupy their time. On any summer day in Venice, for example, there are up to 80,000 of these lost souls stumbling around the Grand Canal, cold, hungry, and indignant, searching for a purpose, a pastime, a reason to be. Their plight is mirrored across Italy. An average of 257, or how do you even pronounce these numbers? 300 tourists shuffle through, or what you go say, 257,300 tourists shuffle through the country's cathedrals, palazzi, and ancient ruins daily, with Rome and Florence being the most hard hit. Paris also endures hordes of visiteurs, estrangers, and must barrack and feed around 100,000 of them every night in the summer months. All of them are looking for R&R in the form of crumbling castles, old churches, grand vistas, and the cozy exotic. Wherever they go, tourists are distinct from the local population. They live in a parallel dimension, which coexists but rarely collides with the life of normal civilians. In this dimension, they are treated with special regard. The world's most desirable beaches and old city districts are for their exclusive use, along with the Vatican, pyramids, Acropolis, Taj Mahal, et al. These invaders, who come to command the economies and define the cultures of the places they visit, dwarf historic armies of renown in their size and strength. Rommel the Desert Fox, for example, battled the Allies in Cyrenaica with fewer than 80,000 Africa corps. Napoleon's grand army of chasseurs, grenadiers, and cuirassiers at Waterloo counted 72,000. And Hannibal led only 26,000 Carthaginians on his famous Alpine elephant excursion to humble Rome. William conquered Harold at Hastings with 7,000 Normans. The CIA-backed revanchists at the Bay of Pigs mustered a mere 1,400 Gusanos. And Fidel Castro won Cuba 2 years earlier with a guerrilla force of just 200 Barbudos. All these armies seem quaint when contrasted with the backpacked hordes that storm the Eiffel Tower each afternoon in June. Tourists, like soldiers, are shorn of individual identity. Their dress, their destinations, and demeanor all resemble one another's, with tourism transforming them into a kind of fanny-packed phalanx with a militaristic hive mind. The touristic propaganda they consume en route to their vacation destination is a kind of indoctrination, a soft boot camp that tailors their expectations, attitudes, and goals for the places they will occupy. In the army, the buzz cut, olive drab outfits, drills, marches, and ideological basic training are designed not for an acumen on the battlefield as much as to ease the soldier's ego and ingratiate them into the organization which acts as enforcer of the nation's economic agenda. Thus, when the soldier is deployed, they are no longer so-and-so from Idaho who drives a Camaro, but an indoctrinated G.I. Joe who does what they're told. The platoon or the band of brothers is the soldier's family overseas. This family has its own myths, values, patriarch, as well as its family business. Its own family business, enforcing its nation's imperial will either through violence or the threat of violence. Sometimes actual conflict occurs, war, but typically the invocation of violence is sufficient for extortion, provided the extortionist government has a track record of barbarity and can stake the plausible claim to sadism and cynical realpolitik, example, Hiroshima. Regardless, when the soldier is discharged, they will have gained worldliness, having been stationed overseas. This promise of sophistication has been the allure of the military for centuries. The Swedish Viking youths in the 10th century who went to serve the Byzantine emperor as the Varangian Guard were mythic in their native land, the subject of many a runestone. Join the Navy and see the world was the recruitment pitch of the last century, and the American veterans of war in Vietnam typically commissioned a satin jacket emblazoned with the circumstances of their time overseas. Unit number, years of service, places stationed et al., topped off with some wry sentiment of anti-authoritarian fatalism. At sports events, airports, and ice cream parlors, the veteran or service person is genuflected before and regarded with official displays of near holy reverence. Whether they saw combat or not, they put themselves in danger for us, or so the saw goes. Regardless of what your politics are or what they were actually doing, the soldier is supposed to be the outer defense crust of the collective us. Whatever they are doing now, when they were in uniform, they were our exoskeleton. They put themselves in harm's way instead of us and for our sake. As with Christ on the cross dying for our sins, or other various patriotic homilies, the logic is unclear as to exactly what we are thankful for, but every civilian does feel genuine relief that the soldier went through this crucible, the metamorphosis of the individual into unquestioning exponent of potential sacrifice of the state instead of them. Like the soldier, the tourist is also transformed through the act of tourism, from an individual into an exponent of their nation and or class and an enforcer of its ideology. But while the soldier is working class, the tourist is bourgeois. At home, the tourist, raised on the capitalist ideology of heroic individualism, espouses various likes, dislikes, and personal beliefs. These are carefully honed to display a blend of reason and sensible conformity on the one hand, important for likability, employment, and mating, with a pinch of perversity and impertinence on the other, to show that they are free-thinking and nobody's fool, also vital components for successful coupling. With this constructed identity and personality, they define and contrast themselves against neighbors, family, friends, and society at large. In a foreign land, however, these affectations lose value and become meaningless. The tourist feels lost and unremarkable, and deigns to hang around countrymen as they would normally eschew with snobbish contempt. Marching through the old town of a foreign city with their tourist cohort, the once proud individual is distinct as a bee in a swarm. The reduction of the tourist into an emblem of their particular class and place of origin is quite dramatic, as is their willingness to leave their possessions, which constitute some of their primary sources of identity and power. The tourist, in their natural habitat, is housed, clothed, and capable of cooking in their own kitchen. They also typically transport themselves in their own automobiles. As a tourist, though, out of dutiful adherence to the bourgeois edict of attaining worldliness, they render themselves homeless, carless, hungry, and helpless. They hurl themselves into an exotic environ where they are disoriented, dumb, and confused. Their days abroad are existential, empty voids they seek to fill, either with consumerist debauchery or culture. Historically, the reasons for military conquest would be to gain a nation's wealth, treasure, sophistication. The example, the culture of Byzantium coveted by the Crusaders and Turks. Resources, as with the German attempt to conquer Russia or the USA's invasion of Iraq. Or with a strategic position on the map, such as Malta for the British or Afghanistan for NATO. With tourism, it's the same. The tourist is on such an expedition, either to consume cultural wealth, such as art, architecture, etc., national splendor, a beach or a mountain range, or visit a place that strategically positions them in a particular social context. Example, Tulum, St. Tropez, Marrakech in the 60s. The food and drink of a place also a concern for the tourist could be considered both cultural wealth and resource. Tourist agencies often invent new cultural treasures and attractions and use these to dispatch tourists to ever more remote outposts such as Iceland, which was, until recently, thought of as a barren volcanic rock shrouded in darkness, whose inhabitants ate fermented shark, but is now a trendy top-shelf destination. When the vacation is over and the tourist is discharged from their tour of duty, they return home with anecdotes, insights, and a bag laden with souvenirs. They are already planning their next expedition. Meanwhile, another tourist, indistinguishable from them, dutifully patrols the landmarks, cultural treasures, and or splendor of whatever vacation spot they just left. Though they seem compelled to tour for romance, wanderlust, and to gain social credit, there is another impulse at work. The tourist is compelled to tour because doing so serves a strategic role for the system, economy, and state of which they are an exponent. The tourist serves as part of a colonizing army. In previous eras, that one nation might invade and occupy another, and thus gain proprietary economic advantages over their fallen foe. Sometimes there would be an enduring military presence in between land to enforce submission and occupation. The Romans had fortresses across North Africa, the Near East, and Europe. Moorish castles still stand in Granada, and English castles dot the Celtic landscape in Wales. The USA has fortresses too. Fort Wayne, Fort Worth, Fort Lauderdale are among many army bases built to conquer, suppress, and expel indigenous peoples during the United States' insatiable expansion, the so-called winning of the West. U.S. Army bases have been a feature around the globe, from Okinawa to Italy, ever since World War II, established under the post-war pretext of containing communism. The War on Terror and invasion of Afghanistan created the opportunity to erect more military installations in theretofore inaccessible ex-Soviet nations like Uzbekistan. But the army bases are ungainly, unpopular, and can only do so much. The USA's 750 plus overseas military bases are expensive to maintain as well, and the personnel culled from the poorest and least reconstructed sectors of society are sometimes a liability, as they can be drunk and disorderly, go AWOL, or what have you. Therefore, while army bases are effective for ensuring the submission of a beaten foe, a different sort of boots on the ground is required for a more comprehensive occupation. The tourist is perfect for this role, guileless and idealistic, curious about the place they visit, and representing the most respectable class of their mother country. They serve to spread the values of their homeland and, through their patronage, cultivate these aesthetics and concepts wherever they go. The hotels they use, the restaurants that serve them, and the cabs they hail must meet the Platonic ideals they enforce through their patronage. The tourists are a multinational occupying force, and represent a pan-bourgeois army spreading the middle-class values, morality, customs, aesthetics, and material standards wherever they go. Just as Hitler's Wehrmacht was a polyglot, comprising soldiers from across the Reich, the Charlemagne SS division from France, the Viking and Nordland SS divisions from Scandinavia, the Ukrainian Nightingale battalion, and the Blue Legion from Spain, among others, who united under the banner of fascism, Russophobia, anti-Semitism, and anti-communism. And just as Napoleon incorporated men-at-arms from across his empire to spread the Enlightenment ideals of the Code Napoleon, the tourist is also part of a grand army who hail from across different nations, but share a bourgeois sensibility and value system. The tourist is as effective in spreading the neoliberal values as Muhammad's horsemen were in spreading Islam across the Middle East and North Africa during their whirlwind conquests. The tourist, though ostensibly spurning their homeland and imbued with a curiosity for the foreign and exotic, actually brings their culture, their morality, their digital technology, and their aesthetics with them. And with totalitarianism intrinsic to the market, enforces their institution on the ground. The tourist is therefore an indispensable strategic asset, not only as a diplomat and an occupying centurion, but one who in the neoliberal tradition pays for their own bed and board. Yes, the tourist is a member of an occupying force that maintains a foothold on foreign soil, but at great cost to themselves. Like the adjuncts and graduate students who replaced tenured professors during the neoliberal university push, or the millennial interns whose free labor enabled the purge of salaried writers, designers, and photographers at media conglomerates during the digital coup, or Silicon Valley's transformed workforce of disposable beggars, gig workers, who have no security, pension, or health care, example, Uber and Instacart drivers. The tourist is the neoliberal's G.I. Joe, who bivouacs for the tech capitalist fatherland, but on their own dime. These DIY troopers don't enjoy the meager perks of the military, such as C rations, C-130 transport planes, base camps, or any kind of esprit de corps. Instead, they must organize and foot the bill for every aspect of their own D-Day invasion. The tourist is responsible for themselves and is never rewarded for their time in the field with medals, citations, pensions, or benefits of the normal serviceman or woman, despite the fact their work is many times more vital to the project of imperialism than the old-fashioned dog face sitting on their ass back at base. After all, the soldier, though they might hit the town on R&R and raise some hell as a pariah stuck in uniform, unable to effectively infiltrate or influence, these khaki-wearing dinosaurs are quaint relics of an old type of imperialism, which has almost been entirely replaced by a new model army of culture vulture, jet-set, boutique hotel tourist commandos, whose nouveau Omaha Beach is equipped with a tequila bar and whose Pork Chop Hill is a Michelin restaurant. Already Germany is dotted with abandoned army barracks, and brothels that once served them are cold and shuttered. Soon we shall see the last of these old-timey garrisons fade out of sight, replaced by Airbnbs and luxury resorts that will house the tourist occupation army that does the work of its olive-drab predecessor in a manner which better suits the miserly libertarian austerity despots who run the G7, IMF, and World Bank. The occupation paradigm is used to be one of the relinquishing the best property and using it for the high command and barracks of the invaders. During the Nazi occupation of Paris, for example, the Luftwaffe took the Ritz, the German Navy moved to the Hotel de Marine, the German intelligence annexed the Hotel Lutetia, and the German High Command took the Majestic Hotel as their headquarters. Particular bordellos, cabarets, cinemas, and cafes became the playground for an exclusively German clientele, as every Wehrmacht soldier was promised a minimum of one leave in Paris. After Germany lost the war, the USA established its occupation headquarters in a picturesque Heidelberg, a city, delightfully medieval bridge, a Rosicrucian Renaissance garden, Hortus Palatinus, and historical significance at the center of the German Romantic movement. With an eye to an extended stay there in the future, the Americans had spared it the carpet bombing that they had laid waste to the rest of the country. Similarly, during the French conquest of Egypt, Napoleon's science and arts entourage annexed the elegant Ottoman palace, Bayat al-Sinari, and in Iraq, the U.S. military brass, mercenary contractors, and oilmen bunked at Saddam's modernist Republican palace in the Tony colonizers' only Baghdad neighborhood they called the Green Zone. The modern tourist, as the premier agent for the ongoing imperial conquest by a stateless neoliberal global capitalist, also takes the best property in every city they invade. With the new Airbnb paradigm, this means the most sought-after neighborhoods are off-limits to locals, the exclusive domain of an Instagramming jet-set elite. Industries they patronize are also annexed the most valued properties. The Paris Opera House is entirely occupied by cavernous Apple Store, for example. While we can see that tourists are a kind of covert soldiery, soldiers are tourists too. One could view Napoleon, Alexander the Great, Richard Lionheart, and Douglas MacArthur this way. The Vikings, Huns, and Mongol horde were all sightseers and curiosity seekers who pillaged and conquered in a manner not dissimilar to beachgoers in Cancun or Bora Bora. The Corinthians who invaded Syracuse were like the modern moneyed expats who just needed a getaway. Julius Caesar's war journals, the Commentary de Bello Gallico, read his travelogues, in which he regales the reader with accounts of Druids, Gauls, Aquitani, and Germans he encountered on his campaigns. The Crusades were composed of pilgrims, eager to ogle the holy places. When Napoleon went to Egypt, he brought hundreds of scholars and scientists, Masonic Egyptologists, intent on cataloging the treasures of the pharaohs, not unlike the sightseers who crowd the British Museum to gawk at those same items nowadays. Marshal Goring was a collector whose Blitzkrieg of Europe was, for him, principally a method of collecting rare paintings and sculpture. Many modern tourists are collectors as well. Their travels facilitate similar shopping yens. The U.S. annexation of Hawaii was motivated by a desire to control the Pacific militarily and economically, but also ensured the best waves for surfing were in the U.S. territory, extending Monroe's locals-only doctrine to include Surf City. And the Spanish Civil War was the ultimate touristic event, with oodles of adventure seekers from all over Europe going to bear arms under the Catalonian sun, while Hemingway and Orwell scribbled travel reports from the front lines. Like that war, which was chic for leftists, tourism is always tinged with a political aesthetic aspect with regard to what it means where one goes. Though this seems like a radical shift of the military occupation paradigm, we see the tourist and the soldier aren't that different. In fact, the two are twins in a bipartite attack. After the soldier storms the beach, the tourist maintains its pacification through clueless passive-aggressive occupation. While the soldier uses arms, the tourist cudgel is their dollar, and the monetary incentive they give the colonized to continue their servitude. While the soldier seizes the wealth of a country, the tourist pumps up the value of that treasure. The bounty of a nation and its culture, after all, are the things that give the place its worth. If a place is cleaned of its loot, it's no longer an asset for its conqueror. If the treasure is codified, mythologized, and nationalized, though, as with the Colosseum, the pyramids, or the treasures of the Louvre, the place retains value and profits are guaranteed to increase. Invasion is not unlike the modern real estate market in this respect. How much longer do I have? A little bit more to go. When Western Europe was conquered by the USA in 1945, theretofore undesirable places such as Iceland, Belgium, the Netherlands became touristic destinations for Americans who continue a de facto occupation that exists to the present day. Eastern Europe, which had been annexed by the Soviet Union, was déclassé to the same pleasure seekers, despite the fact that the Black Sea, Budapest, Prague, and Kiev were at least as culturally rich as touristic hotspots like Munich, Brussels, and Dublin. Once the Soviet Union was sold out and defeated by a combination of Cold War attrition and international treachery, the East was overrun with tourists who occupied the perimeter in a manner the anti-communist crusaders of NATO had always dreamed of doing but never could. Because the value of a country is rated by the strength of its tourist trade, many nations contrive cultural wealth and resources to attract tourist invasion and occupation. The culture of a country can concoct for itself is the lure for this tourism. When a country hasn't got a Colosseum or an Eiffel Tower, it must invent some other attraction for the occupier. Can the country make a compelling case for itself as a cultural place? What does culture consist of? At this point, provided it has the right sales pitch, it can be almost anything. An inhospitable environment or a price tag that makes it exclusive, as seen with the recent craze for space tourism. As the old prohibition against traveling to the USSR, tourism is still officially discouraged in enemy countries that haven't been subdued entirely to the global capitalist hegemon such as Iran, Cuba, or North Korea, places which are flagged with fearful travel advisories. With the advent of the internet, the ultimate colonizer, the tourist job, has become more efficient but also less vital. The internet dictates standardization and conformity and can work hand in hand with the tourist, maximizing their economic influence, but it also threatens the tourist's role as soft centurion. The internet is the same almost everywhere you go and enforces the sameness in the world it occupies. With this imperialist internet, once exotic destinations have become indistinct from one another in an arms race of conformity to a global standard of luxury brand diversity, streetwear, and corporate-sponsored celebrity skateboarding. There is less and less incentive to travel because everywhere is an indistinguishable worldwide webscape accessible from anywhere, which can be homogenized and policed remotely. More and more, the tourist mission overseas seems redundant and unnecessary. The tourist who has never been officially recognized for their selfless service to the state faces an inevitable phasing out like their GI predecessor suffers now if restrictions on global net surfing aren't put into place. Just as the flower of French knighthood was extinguished at the hands of vulgar archers at the Battle of Crécy and Agincourt, the tourist will be replaced by decidedly non-adventurous virtual technology. And the tourist, having insisted on the latest Wi-Fi and computer technology at the remote Himalayan getaway and blissful island paradise, has played the key role in implementing their own obsolescence. So, though the sightseer still stubbornly sallies forth into battle with the doughty spirit for which he or she is renowned, they do so wistfully, knowing their days are numbered. The writing is on the wall. The brave tourist soldier may soon be like the knights of yore, a legend and nothing more. Alright, there you go. Thanks for watching. And as you can see, this sort of encapsulates a number of different ideas. The bit at the end there about the homogenization of the internet having to do, obviously, with the Uranus dynamic of technological development and the Jupiter aspect of trying to kind of tie everything together, unite everything together. And what I wanted to basically get in here was that there's this kind of thing of like being, I've got this thing of feeling kind of like frustrated, just being kind of like stuck in my hometown, basically. And there's this kind of thing of like this idea that it could be like a adventurous thing to go off traveling, or that it could be rebelling against the status quo, or to break out from the rut of just doing the same thing every day in the same place, to go on a visit, go some new place you've never been before. But the thing is that, like I said, you're not actually breaking free. You're becoming part of a homogenized army where you just step in line with all the other tourists who take you to see the same destinations, everybody taking the same picture of the same monument that everybody's seen a million times before anyways. And then after a little bit of that, you go back to your hotel room and just stare at your phone like it doesn't even matter where you are, right? And so I would like to propose that it may actually be a little bit more rebellious, a little bit more courageous to actually stay at home or stay in your community and actually occupy the place where you live, the place that is your home, rather than being like, I can't stand it here, I need to go find somewhere else where I can do my thing. Why not make the place where you actually are your own thing and make that your little rebellion? That's my idea anyways. So anyways, I don't know, this is just one of the ideas that's been coming up for me around this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. And, Venus and Neptune are conjunct today as I'm making this as well, so there may be a kind of like, I don't know, being lost in a bit of a kind of ideological fantasy or something like that. But, take it with a grain of salt. Take it, it's up to you to separate the wheat from the chaff and get whatever may be valuable for you out of this. I'm just putting it out there. Maybe you don't know it. Maybe people who watch my videos haven't heard of this guy, right? Maybe this is some stuff for you to check out. All right, thank you very much.